Welcome to the Alchemy of Success podcast with Dr. Michael Leslie, designed to give smart, ambitious 9-to-5ers the knowledge, insights, and tools they need to live their best life. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Alchemy of Success. Tonight, I'm your host, Jason Wilson. And tonight, we're back with Dr. Michael Leslie. We're going to do part 2 of our continued conversation from last week. Let's run the clip on who Dr. Michael Leslie is. We'll be right back.
Dr. Michael Leslie, Ph.D., is an experienced speaker, facilitator, coach, and trainer, and served 35 years as a tenured professor of journalism and communications at the University of Florida. He has traveled extensively, teaching and researching intercultural communication, leadership, and personal transformation in 20 countries on 4 continents. He speaks fluent English, Spanish, French, and is proficient in Portuguese. He is a graduate of multiple landmark worldwide personal development and training programs, including the Curriculum for Living, the Team Management and Leadership Program, the Communication Course, the Leadership Course, and numerous specialized landmark seminars on money, living life by design, and happiness, among others. The results of his intellectual and professional endeavors have been published in academic and trade journals, and he has been a featured guest on numerous international radio and television programs. He lives currently in Cali, Colombia, where he hosts a podcast called The Alchemy of Success, based on his book, How to Get What You Really Want, available on Amazon. He is currently designing a 7-day in-person life transformation experience for next-level self-actualizers, debuting October 2025 in Santa Marta. To find out more about his services, subscribe to his Alchemy of Success podcast at www.youtube.com or at Get What You Really Want, or contact him via his website at www.drmichaelleslie.com. Hi, Jason.
Hello, Dr. Michael Leslie. How are you tonight?
Well, I'm glad to see that we're back and that we can continue this exploration of how to get what you really want out of life.
Wonderful. We had an awesome conversation last week. I'm, really excited to get back into our continuation tonight. But the first thing I wanted to reference, Dr. Leslie, is your bio on your LinkedIn profile. Now we have international living expert, life transformation coach, multilingual success mentor, international retreat leader, intercultural communication expert. Now, we're going to touch on all of those, but I think it's important to touch on the first one, which is international living expert. Explain to us what that is and exactly what you do.
Well, as you know, I've been traveling for most of my life, living abroad, traveling, teaching, doing research. And so I've accumulated a lot of experience on how to adapt oneself to different international and intercultural experiences, right? Or lifestyles. So I've decided that probably the best thing I can do at this stage in my life is to offer what I've learned as a way of assisting other people who are interested in making the international transition. They need help, obviously, adjusting culturally, excuse me. But people also need help. If you want to do this thing, you're going to need help in getting your money together, organized the way it needs to be. You're going to need help arranging for health coverage and all of those things for your family, even for yourself. And you're also going to need to develop a different attitude, to take yourself out of the mindset of, well, I'm an American and things should be done my way wherever I go, to maybe the attitude of, I'm a visitor in the places that I'm going to, and I need to find out how they do things if I expect to get along. So, in this time that we're living in, which people are increasingly considering moving abroad, I thought I might be able to offer something to help people accomplish that successfully.
That's really, really interesting. And, we're planning a retreat for Santa Marta here in Colombia in October, from October the 12th through the 18th. Now, we're going to be giving people advice on how to basically change their mindset from the American mindset to being able to adjust to the culture here in Colombia, and that's one of the things that you specialize in. So, what exactly do you do, or what kind of advice do you give people that are going to be leaving the United States, coming here to Colombia?
Well, at the very most basic level, I think people would obviously want to do some study of history, right? Most countries in Latin America, including Colombia, have, I would say, a rather complicated history of relationships with the United States. I mean, in some sense, we've been very domineering in terms of our relationships with the Colombian culture and other Latin American cultures. So there's a sense of, I think that there's a sense of arrogance that we as Americans actually bring to our relationships with other people. For example, I know that people expect things to be done on time. They definitely expect them to be done in a way that what we would call works. It's a very transactional kind of relationship where you give people money and you expect to get back whatever it is that you were promised in the way in which you thought or you were promised it would be delivered. And that doesn't really take place in much of Latin America, because much of the relationships are not transactional, they're relational, right? So it depends on not only who you know, but how well you know that person, whether you're connected with people that person also knows, whether or not you've developed a relational trust with the person that you're doing business with, or even in intimate relationships. The expectations that we have of how relationships are supposed to work are frequently one of the frequent complaints that I think American men have when they come here is that almost all of what they are, all of what has to happen financially, the women in Latin America generally think that the man is going to take care of those things, right? So it's not this 50-50 culture, where, you pay your half and I pay mine. It's very different. And so if you come expecting it to be an American style experience, you're going to be disappointed or maybe even frustrated. So my work is to help people, to sensitize them to some of those differences that they're likely to encounter, and also to get out or transition from the mindset that says it should be done my way, so they can begin to allow things to be done differently and still work.
Okay, yeah, that's a great point too. But the interesting thing, if you agree with me, let me know, Dr. Leslie. But you can go to, let's say, if you go to Medellin and you go to Bogota after that, it's a completely different culture from those two cities. In Medellin, those people are really, really um, empresarial in Spanish, but they love to start businesses. They're very business minded, and in Bogota, they're business minded too, but I don't think that they have as many people that are business owners in Bogota as opposed to Medellin. And then when you take a look at the relationships between the men and the women, I think that the women in Medellin, they respond to men a lot differently than in Bogota. I think they're a lot more personable in Medellin, a lot more warmer, and in Bogota, it's not as friendly. So you have cultural differences like that, depending on what city you go to. What would you say on that?
Well, I think that what you're saying underlines the need to actually do some homework, right? When you're traveling to another country, whether it's, we're talking about Colombia, but it would apply to the United States, for example. If you were living in the South, you would have a different kind of relationship and experience and even a pace of life than you would have if you were in New York or perhaps even in the Midwest, right? And there's a lot of when I talk about relationships, I also want to talk about the manners that you're expected to have in a culture. Maybe being much more flexible, certainly much more polite when negotiating whatever it is that you're trying to obtain, and also aware of the fact that certain kinds of inputs that you might want, whether it's in the in the personal sphere or in the business sphere, may not be readily available. One of the things that I often run into is because I'm in the midst of a renovation project here in Cali, where we're installing a jacuzzi and we're doing some refurbishing of the roof and the interiors, and you rarely can't walk into a store here and say, and oh, I want this couch and I want these these parts to repair the roof, and I want this delivered to my house by the weekend. I mean, it doesn't happen that way. So you have to be prepared. One of the things that the amount of time it takes to get something done is much larger or much longer than we would expect it to be. Certainly, as you put it, rightly said, if you go to a larger, Bogota's the capital city. Medellin, I think, is the second largest city in the country. So you probably have access to more of what you want or need there, variety of people that you might meet than you would have if you go to a smaller city, say, I would say the size of Cartagena, for example, by comparison, although Cartagena has a lot to offer. But then if you get to even smaller towns like the one I live in, Santa Elena, or the one that you live in Mica, it's difficult to get what you want when you want it, right? So I the main thing, I mean, what I'm trying to point to is that you really have to develop this different approach to, or oh no, I'm sorry, you really have to adjust your expectations of what you should have or should obtain, or what people should do or not do, and that actually takes some time. Along the same lines of that, of being the differences in different parts of the country and the way people behave and all of that. There's also this aspect of when you're having this transitional experience, you might want to make sure that you're here long enough to be able to see that. I mean, I when I first came here, I was enthusiastic, you might say, or maybe even, well, enthusiastic. I'm still enthusiastic, but I was living in I would say, a fantasy world about all the wonderful things that Colombia had to offer, right? And it has a lot to offer, but it comes with a cost, right? And that cost is that I've had to adjust my time frame for getting things done. I've also had to begin to study to learn that I what I say, even though I speak Spanish, I think you'll get this too.
Yeah.
It's what I say in Spanish is not necessarily what's understood by the person I'm speaking to. They have a different connotation. There's the words. I got the translation, but they have a different connotation for the words that I'm using, even though they're the correct translation. They're not the correct connotation, and so you can easily get people think that you've communicated effectively, but you haven't communicated at all, or you've done it in a very limited way. I'm thinking, like, as an example, I'm thinking how people, when we say a friend, right, un amigo, that has a lot of variance, right? Amigo could be someone that you just met. It could be someone that you know very deeply, like a compadre, right? And it could be, and if we're talking about females, then that's a whole different conversation altogether. I mean, what does it mean to be a friend if you're of the opposite sex, right? And so here it might be interpreted as being much more a deeper, a more significant relationship for here than it would be for someone in the United States who called someone my friend. So again, there's all of these nuances in this interaction. It's in cultural encounter, and I try to when I'm talking to people, I try to get them to take a deeper look at one who they're being when they come here, and then second who people are, the people that they're interacting with, what they might be bringing to the interaction in terms of how they understand you, being a foreigner, right? Not someone from their own country. I just saw this just now. I mean, when you go into the store here, and this has been my experience not here but in many places, you're not getting the local price for things. You're getting the adjusted price for the American, right, who
Right.
presumably has more money to spend on that thing. Now, how would you know that to begin with, right? And then how would you can you adjust your interface so that you get the local price or at least something close to it rather than getting the American price, which is usually, anywhere from 50% more to 100% more.
I don't know. My wife, we used to go places, and she would tell me, Jason, okay, do not tell them that you're from the United States. Tell them that you're from San Andres. And then
Yeah.
that way, you won't get these American prices that they're used to charging you. And in a lot of cases, she was absolutely right. If I tell them that, I lived over in the States for a while, but I'm from San Andres, then the treatment was different. But you're right on the point that if you go to Cartagena and you're there for a week or a two week vacation, they're going to charge you, let's say, $150 for a plate at a restaurant when it should only be, let's say, 30 or 40,000 pesos. I mean, it's ridiculous what they do to foreign people in Cartagena. I don't know if that's your experience, but
Yes, that was also my experience, and what's I found also frustrating about this, and I appreciate. Actually, I'm going to put into use what you just told me your wife does when you go out. I'm from here, but I've been away for a while, but I'm
yeah,
back. And I know what the deal is, something like that. That's actually brilliant. I would. What my partner does is she says, well, I'll go in and I'll talk to these folks and I'll negotiate it, so I never really have to get involved, because I know that if I do show up, it's not going to be financially, it's not going to be very profitable for me.
uh huh,
Um, but you said something else there. You're going to, there's this uh, um, interface, the interface part of it. So I'm wondering, when I do the work that I do, I wanted to come back a little bit more to what we think should obtain as opposed to what obtains when we're abroad. Why we bring the mindset we do, and what we could do about that. Um, and it has something to do with also a sense of, I think, superiority, right? I mean, I don't know how many, I've been in places where people actually say, Americans, why don't you speak American? As in, everybody should be speaking English, even though you're in a country where everyone speaks Spanish. I mean,
right.
or why don't they have more people who speak English here? That sort of thing. As though the people here are backward because they're not doing it the American way or to Americans' expectations. So there's something about, I use the word, that's why I use the word arrogance. And there's another word, chauvinistic, right? This kind of, the way things are being done here is not the right way. Not only it should be the American way, but it's not the right way. And I've come to understand that, I always looked at, well, what's a big deal having relationships? I mean, I don't want to have a relationship with everybody I meet just so I can get something done. It feels like I'm actually have to pander to them sometimes, right? And it's like, well, where did I get that thought from, that the best kind of relationship is transactional? where you give money and you get this result, as opposed to, uh, can I get to know you? What's your family like? Where do you live? What do you like to do? Which, by the way, gives the local people in, we're talking about Colombia, but we could be talking about, South Africa, or we could be talking about Spain or any place. It gives an opening for them to see where they might serve you, right? Connect to you
Right.
in some way. Like, okay, you have a family, or you have kids. Oh, well, I know a school here that your kids might be interested in. Even though you're buying appliances, there are other benefits from being non-transactional, right? That relationship part. Or it might be that you are talking, and then you say you have you share a problem that you have. Like, oh yeah, I also have a problem with my foot, right? And I need to have that treated. And then they'll say, oh, well, I know a very good doctor, and I can give you his phone number, So it solves a lot of potential and real problems that you have if you enter into this from a relational uh, uh, point of view than from a transactional point of view.
Yeah, I mean, culturally, people relate to you a completely different way here, and I, like you're saying, they're genuinely interested in getting to know you as a person. Whereas in the states, I didn't always have that kind of interaction with people. Um, I know that your experience in the states, leaving there and going to Mexico, was a completely different experience as well. But again, they it wasn't so much that they were prejudiced against you. They were just generally curious about you, and wanted to get to know the kind of person that you were. I'm sure that they had their idea of how American people were from movies and TV shows and stuff that they had seen, right? But yeah, it wasn't a disrespect to me at all when I first got here. Getting to know people, it was just curiosity. And in relationships, like you're saying, especially with women, they want to get to know you as a person. It's not a transactional type of interaction at all, really.
Mhm. Yeah, and in continuing to enlarge our conversation, you know, the uh, the expansive part of it is, I think, where we can have a shift in our uh, perspective, right? Like, as I said, this idea that I know better, I know the right way. It shouldn't be this way. Why don't they do it our way? Um, that allows for you to also relax. Right now, I know that sounds a little strange coming from me, because I even when I hear even when I hear myself say it, because I'm pretty intense about getting stuff done. Right? You gave me your word; it should be done, and it should be done on time. Right? And that part of it involves some surrendering, I think, of our identity. So part of the process of adjusting cross culturally is allowing yourself to become someone you were not when you arrived. Um, and that process has a flow to it. So when you come to a place, you're thinking, okay, oh, it's great. I love it here. I'm going to move to Colombia in this case, and live happily ever after, right? And then notice that things don't flow or go the way that you want them to go, when you want them to go, how you want them to go. So you start to get a little, maybe depressed, and maybe even resentful, right? You're on ascendant, and then all of a sudden you're going into this um, deep kind of place, a hole, I would call it, in terms of how comfortable you feel with this new international experience. It might even be with your relationship, right? You meet this person, she or he seems great, and then you discover, well, they also have this family, right? That you have to also deal with all of the family, or at least a lot of people that you didn't think you signed up for, right? And especially here where the family is so closely knit, right? So
Right.
it's not like you have the option. You're going to have the sisters and the brothers and the uncles and the aunts and the mother. They're part of your life, not something far away as we have it. This nuclear family. Well, no, this is an extended family now that you have
Yep.
to cope with,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So you're going now you're in this kind of a underground and kind of in a ditch about the whole thing and wondering if you made the right decisions. And then the third phase of this is you acquire some tools. You sort of understand how things really work, not the way you thought they were going to work, but how they work. And then once you've acquired some understanding of it, like we had to go through four. Here, I'll give you an example. As I said, we're remodeling, and we hiring a contractor, and we had three people come out and said, "Yeah, we can do this, this, that, and the other," and they never came back. They never showed up again, you know.
Wow.
And I was going, wait a minute, we are paying, we are did say we pay them, right? And we do have the money. It's not like, oh, we don't know if you're going to pay us or not, and we're going to pay you what you asked for. So all of that was in place, but it was like, well, it didn't happen, and I had to inquire, and it was, well, you can't get a contractor to work for you unless they have a connection with someone else. You have a connection with someone else that they have worked for before, and a real connection, not just that you know them and got a referral, but that the other person vouches for you, right? The other person also has a kind of relationship with you or with me in this case that they don't want to jeopardize their relationship with me. So they're going to make sure that the contractor that they send me will be someone who will fulfill on their word, like that.
Right.
So that's kind of a network thing to it rather than a transactional, right, or individual approach to this thing, right? So I think those are the kinds of learnings. That's step three. So you learn how to deal with it. You learn the ropes, as they say, and then you come back up and start. You still now you're coming out of your depression and your frustration and your what fear that it really is not going to work. You got some skills now, and you come back up, and this time now you're not elated. You're not like when you came in on top of the world and everything's great, but you're up again. You're out of your depression, and you're more realistic about what can actually occur, how you might fit in, and what might be the result. So I don't expect this project, which I thought this is 3 months later that we're still talking about installing the jacuzzi. That's our big project. And this is 3 months later. The ground has not been broken. you know, um, we're in the process of ordering, the tools and everything we need. What they call the inputs. There's the cement and the sand and the electricity, hardware, and all this stuff. But it's not going to happen. I don't think even in the next 30 days, right? It might happen over the next 30 days. It gets started, but I've
Right.
taken what I'm getting to is I've had to kind of detach myself from, this is going to get done on some time frame that I thought to. It'll get done when it gets done, and just relax. You relax, and when it's done, you can celebrate, but you can't push it. You can't
No.
push it. Yeah.
I got to tell you, I'm laughing because, I've been through a lot of situations like that. But before I left the country, the best piece of advice that I got was a guy that had spent, I think, 3 or 4 months in Brazil working. And I told him that I was going to be living in Colombia. He's like, okay. So every time that I saw him, he would give me different pieces of advice. So one of those pieces of advice that I'll never forget, he said, Jason, do not act like you're going to play angry American over there. Don't even try it. He said, have patience with the situation, have patience with those people, and you'll get what you want. But if you play angry American, it's just not going to work for you, and it may even cause problems. I said, okay, all
Yeah.
right. I just never forgot that, and it's worked out. and
Well, you know,
Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
And, on that family piece, when I got married, the biggest thing that I had to adjust to was the family just showing up at the house unannounced, no phone call, no nothing. Man, I never forget. My wife and I, we were in bed. Now, this was a Sunday, and I think it was at like 7 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And at 7:30, all the family arrived at the house. Rang the doorbell. I'm in the bed. I'm in my boxer shorts. So I had to like run and get dressed, throwing something real quick. And I ran out to the living room to open the door. And they made a joke about it and they said, "Oh, Jason just put on the first thing that he could find." I, I said, "Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not expecting you to show up at my house." So yeah, it's little things like that that you have to adjust to, especially if you get married. So
Yeah,
very true.
yeah, yeah. So maybe we should talk about another aspect of this, and that's the monetary piece, right? So I was expecting, and generally I expect when I go to a what some people would call a less developed country, which I don't think we can do use that word anymore. Um, uh, when I go abroad to the global south, let me put it that way. Yeah, the southern hemisphere countries, right? I expect prices to be generally lower, right? And that's and you actually you're told that sometimes when you move, you say, well, you're going to save a lot of money, and you'll be able to live here for half the cost of the U.S. and all of that.
Right.
And from my experience, you'd have to be very, very deliberate about doing that because some things are much cheaper, but some things are much more expensive, right? And so if you need something that can only be imported or that has a large tax on it because it is imported, then you're going to wind up exceeding your budget, right? If you can find out how to live, as we were talking earlier, as a local, you might be able to stay within that budget. But that also requires that you have a local mindset about what things should obtain. Let me be particular. So, you may want to have paint be of a certain quality, or you might want to have the finishings in your house be of a certain quality. And the higher the expectation of what the quality of things will be, the more likely you're going to have to spend a lot more money to get them because you want them to be equivalent perhaps to something you experienced stateside in our case, right? So I'm or the streets. Oh yeah, why don't they have the streets paved, right?
No.
So I
Yeah.
mean, well, there's a it doesn't whoever is responsible for that. Um, Relatively speaking, the streets are paved, right? But they're not
Right.
paved to your expectations of what a paved street should be like, right?
Right.
So like you said, you're going to always be in this process of if you insist on having it be your way or the way you think it should be, you're going to be very unhappy, for the most of the time that you're here. I'm thinking about also trash collection, right? Which is my one of my favorite peeves because first off, the expectation I would have had, and I still have actually, is that okay? Well, let's or at least if we can't get it picked up, at least let's not throw it in the street, right? Something like that. Let's bundle it or something. And then you realize that well, first off, there's no place to put the trash, right? It's not just being collected. Like where do you put it while you're waiting for it to be collected? And then what happens to it if it stays weeks without being collected? It probably is going to wind up in the street again. And there's no sense of recycling or those kinds of things. I mean, workable recycling, right? So it's a nice idea, but it just can't be executed in this particular environment because of a number of restrictions and economic and also people's habits, what
Right.
people think it's okay to do, right? So again, I like having this conversation because it puts it out on in front of us what
Yes.
is real, right? versus what we expect, and then making a decision about whether or not you can live with the real rather than what you expected.
Yeah, another huge difference that I had to get used to, man, are the pets, especially dogs, man. I mean, I don't know if you spent any extended time in Bogota, but people, at least this was back in like between 2002 to 2015 when I was there. I mean, dogs, like in specific neighborhoods, you would just see them like rummaging through the neighborhood, no leash, no nothing. I mean, I would say all the time, if that dog was in Florida, for an example, in any city or municipality in Florida, that dog would be picked up by the dog pound. I mean, dogs just don't you don't see dogs just running around aimlessly with no person that owns it on a leash. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't happen here. I mean, I see dogs all the time, especially out in the country. They're just running around with nobody tending to the dog. So that's a
Yeah,
huge difference too.
yeah. So, we could turn to then what does one need to do uh, in order to be successful in internationalizing oneself, moving abroad, even if it's only for a short period of time, but especially if it's for a longer period of time. And we've already identified, a very important one is you really need to do some historical research and some cultural research. I think I like the historical piece of it because, for example, I don't know how many people know that the largest U.S. base in the southern hemisphere is in Colombia, right? And so, that sets a certain tone for American kind of political military domination. The threat is always there. So people would probably be very sensitive, right, to Americans, maybe feel that somehow we're the hegemonic presence of Americans in their country. I know that I have had conversations with some, both males and females, about even in the it's not hate towards Americans, but there's a certain reserve, right? I mean, you're here, you have an extraordinary amount of influence over our economic life here, sometimes even over our political life. In some countries, we've been able to, our government, I should say, has removed presidents, right, or had them removed from office, replaced with other people. More to the liking of the United States. So there's some resentment there about being under the thumb, you would, of Americans,
Yeah.
which carries over even if you're not one of those people, you're not in the military, or you're not maybe high powered business person, where you have that actual power. But there's the halo effect, right? So we become part and parcel of whatever our government is doing at the time. I think that this friction between Petro and Trump now seems to be, it's on people's minds, right?
Yes.
So not just in the U.S., but especially here, right? I don't think people in the U.S. even know who the president of Colombia is, but it's those kinds of things that if you don't understand the history and the politics of the relationship between our country and Colombia or Brazil or Mexico or Puerto Rico, then you're kind of walking into something that's already, the context is already set for you and how you're going to be related to, or at least or how you might not be surprised that you're being related to because you're coming from the empire, if you would. So that's a historical piece I think people really want to bone up on before they just come down and say, I'm going to Colombia. And there's a lot of sun there. There's a lot more going on than that.
Yeah.
Um, so where do we cover? We talked about a bit about finances. We've talked about culture. We've talked about history and politics in terms of our intercultural adjustment and relationship to people, I think maybe we would want to go a little deeper into what obtains in relationships. So you could share some of your experience, and I'll share some of mine. So what has been the most surprising thing for you in your own? You have an intercultural marriage. I know that,
Yes.
uh, and you've been in it for 17 years or more.
17. Yeah.
17, good. So, what's been surprising for you, a surprising discovery that might be helpful to people wanting to know how to do this successfully?
Well, I think we kind of touched on that. Uh, finding out how close the family actually is here. For an example, if my wife and I we get into an argument or something, it's the whole family's business. I and I had to have several conversations with my wife that to be honest with you, the disagreement between the husband and the wife should stay between the husband and the wife. It shouldn't be your brothers and sisters' business, your dad's business, or your mother's business. So that's another cultural difference. I think that in Colombian families, you have to get used to and deal with on an individual basis, right? um, but I think again, man, it's a lot of love, it's a lot of patience, finding out exactly the kind of tone you need to use in certain situations. Of course, you need to argue. Arguing is healthy, but there's fair fighting. No hitting below the belt. Saying things that you find out that maybe a month or 2 months later you can't take back because it's something so hurtful that that person has now internalized, and there's no fixing it, um, because in the moment that you said it, you didn't really want to hurt that person. You were just trying to convey your feelings in a way that maybe you thought was the best way that they could understand it, right? But the thing was so hurtful that you said that you've now damaged that person and hurt their feelings, and you try to apologize. There's no taking it back because um, the way in which you said it was awful. So it's not so much what you say; it's how you say the things,
Mhm.
the tone of
Well, that
voice, the intention behind it. So a lot of that I had to learn over the years, and I think that people are a lot more sensitive in relationships here, as opposed to the states. We're talking about a romance language, right? So the temperament can get very very high in certain situations, and you don't know exactly how to deal with that. But over time, you learn.
I like what you said, or resonated with me. This whole business of tone, right, and tone and volume, right. So I think that my observation is that people, you know, and I don't want to, paint the with too broad a brush, but there's certainly a different tone in speaking that we might be surprised, right? We might interpret it, and they might interpret. Now that I think about it, in our culture, especially in Black culture, we can actually be quite loud, right? Especially
Right.
the females when they're upset, right? So, and the same thing happens here, but it might be interpreted as being disrespectful, right? That, or even an attack, right? Rather than just a way of expressing oneself from different volume, a different tone that does not necessarily imply that one is angry,
Uh
right?
huh.
It could be that one is just speaking with a lot of enthusiasm, right? Um, the other thing that I found is the jokes here. There's, I mean, I some of they're all obviously jokes are pretty much insider culture anyway. Anywhere you go, you wouldn't understand it if you're not part of the culture. It'd be very difficult for you. But I
Yes.
have I have a reasonable mastery of, well, I'll just, I have very good mastery in my of Spanish. I studied it as you have, I mean, many, many years, right? And I've been using it many, many years. and but I don't understand a lot of what people are saying when they're talking, especially when they're talking to each other, because they're using slang for one thing, and then they're also there's this very interesting thing about Spanish, which some expressions or some comments have three, four, or five different meanings, right?
Right.
So, and only if you're Colombian would you understand. You would know, right, that what is being said is not really what's being said. They're not the words themselves. That's what I meant about connotations earlier. But just the different levels in which understanding can take place for an insider, between insiders as opposed to between insider and outsider. So I was again, I just this tone thing for me has been a real experience, because I've sometimes thought that people were angry with me, and I know people thought that I was angry with them, and I
Right.
was just being what I thought was, and very intentional and firm in what I was speaking about. This happened to me just recently. We had a car. Someone ran into the back of our car, and it was a fender bender. Really, no one got hurt. But when it came time to how is this going to get repaired, and so I said to the guy, well, uh, when are you going to get in touch with me? And his response was, well, no one can push me around. So I'm going, well, I wasn't really trying to push you around. I just want to know a date, right?
Uh-huh.
So to him, it was my insistence on having a time, right? That he said a time right now to me, rather than his response was, I'll let you know, like that. And can you imagine how that would, I mean, to an American, how, uh, so those kinds of things. And I don't think he had there was no malevolence in the response, except that he wanted me to know that this was not something I could control. It was something he was willing to do, but on his own timetable, which may
Right.
not fit mine.
Yeah.
In this case, it didn't. And we still haven't gotten paid. And he's still saying, I'm going to pay you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So tone, yeah, tone. Um, and what it was the other aspect of the volume, and then just the whole pace of things, how
Uh-huh.
long how long it takes.
Yes.
What is it? Was there another part of this? So we talked to relationships a little bit. It's talking to people. I'm trying to think. I don't want to, in this introductory piece that we're speaking about, I don't want to leave anything out for the people listening. Are there any questions from anyone out there about this business of being intercultural, moving to another place, leaving your own place, how you live in that place, how you survive in that place if you do decide to go abroad, and then what are you might be required to do in terms of your own personal transformation in order to have it be successful. Do we have anyone out there with a question or a comment? Okay. So if we don't, I think we can move to the sort of the concluding part of this. So
Yes.
I wanted to. Okay.
I
So
have a
I just
question.
wanted to. Oh, good. Go ahead.
Yeah. So on that transformational piece, what would be required from a person to have a transformation, leaving from the states and adjusting, let's say, here to Colombia?
Well, I think it's what we're proposed have proposed to do. So to offer people a retreat situation in which they can spend some time looking at themselves, and also at maybe with the context in which they're living their lives, what they're thinking about, who they are, and what they might become, and where they might have an opportunity for change. And so our idea is to do have this take place in country in Colombia, invite people down, have them have that reflection time, and then have them have some exposure to Colombian culture, right? So that they have both an introspective, and then they have an uh, extra or outer perspective on the place that they've come to visit. That's a, I think, a very first fundamental step in the whole of it. And then the second is maybe to begin to cultivate a sense of humility towards the process itself. It's not something that one is going to master in a day or two, or even a week or a month. It's something one would have over time have to be committed to in order for it to see the results that you want to have. I like to think that we can do this if we do it together. Come to a workshop, meet some people, go out, get exposed to some of the culture, come back and think about how you interacted with that culture, what your thoughts were as you interacted, what came up for you, and then sort of what is when then I think in that process you discover what's missing. What is it that you didn't know that you need to know or that you now know that will help you be successful if you decide to you want to take this move, right? You want to make this move. So I think that's the process of it, reflection, exposure, sort of reflection again after exposure, and then a decision on some things that you'll do to make your integration, if you would, or your transition successful. And that's what we'll be doing at the workshop. That's in October. We're inviting people down to a very beautiful place called on the outskirts of Santa Marta called Palomino, and it's a Eco Hotel. They'll be comfortable there, and we'll have people who come in and talk about many of the things we've talked about tonight, but giving them a international perspective on it. How this might work outside of the culture that you've become accustomed to living in. So that's where we're going with that.
I know it's going to be a wonderful experience, and ladies and gentlemen, we'll have more details on that within the next month or so. We'll have all of that information available here on the Alchemy of Success, and also on my podcast, uh, Circle Back to You podcast, and we'll have that available in Circle of Friends Club and another upcoming project that I have coming up, which I can't talk about now, but it's coming out. Yes, we're going to keep that under wraps for the next couple of months or so, but it's on the way. So,
Good.
Dr. Leslie, this has been another wonderful experience and conversation. Again, I'm going to go back and listen to this tape because there's always something to learn. And thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And thanks for joining us tonight on the Alchemy of Success. We'll have another deep dive into transformation, personal transformation next week. Good night.
Absolutely. How can people find you again, Dr. Leslie?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm on my website is www.drmichaelleslie.com. You can schedule. You'll find a way to schedule time with me if you want to talk about how I can help you in your own process of personal transformation. And then you can also find me here. You can subscribe to the podcast, and you can. That's a second way you can reach me. And then just, you can use, if you want a direct conversation, schedule Calendly. It's www.calendly.com/Dr. Michael Leslie. You can find me there and set up a time to meet and to talk.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Leslie. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be back next week for another exciting interview with Dr. Michael Leslie, Tuesday at 7 o'clock Eastern. Have a great night and great week ahead. Take care.
Good night. Good night, Jason. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you for watching the Alchemy of Success podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next week.